They said I didn't reflect the evolving brand vision, that my demeanor-focused, composed, too quiet didn't fit their energized, media-forward culture. No performance warnings, no write-ups, just a 10-minute meeting, a pre-written script, and a recycled box with a motivational quote on the side. After nearly a decade, I was escorted out like a security threat. What they didn't realize, I was the architect behind the system holding their $45 million federal logistics contract together. And I knew precisely how to unravel it gracefully, quietly, and legally. If you've ever been cast aside for not being on brand, this story is for you. Stay tuned, and if it hits close to home, leave a comment and subscribe. You're not alone. They didn't fire me for missing deadlines or poor reviews. They fired me because I didn't smile enough on camera. Because during a Zoom all-hands meeting, I wore a charcoal blazer instead of lavender. Because I didn't clap when Miles Everett, the new VP of Brand Integration, gave a presentation titled Color First Culture. That was it. That was my offense. It happened on a Thursday morning in early March, chilly overcast, the kind of Seattle gray that makes even coffee shops feel quiet. I had just logged into the Halcyon Grid compliance dashboard when my calendar pinged Quick Sync, Room 12C, 11:15 a.m., no topic, no prep. I already knew. Miles was there, of course, sitting with perfect posture and untouched green juice at his side. Next to him sat Bree Holloway, a junior HR rep barely out of college, furiously writing in a rose gold notebook. I took my seat. Didn't say a word. Miles adjusted his glasses. Cassidy, after reviewing your engagement with our brand realignment strategy and creative culture pivots, leadership has determined your presence no longer aligns with Halcyon Grid's future direction. Presence, not work ethic, not expertise. Just presence. I didn't flinch. Bree passed over a white envelope with both hands. My ID badge was already inactive. Inside a final paycheck, a hotline number for mental wellness, and a line that read, discharged, due to misaligned cultural integration. There were no dramatics, no shouting, just a nod. I stood up, thanked them, and walked out of the room. Calm, controlled, unshaken. On the way out, I passed a group of interns pretending to look busy. Daniel, from Engineering a Man I mentored through his onboarding, looked up, then away. No one said a word. Not even Mark Rosen, Director of Client Ops, who once begged me to fix a failing vendor audit over a long weekend. He closed his door. That afternoon, Halcyon Grid still ran on my architecture. The versioning framework, mine. The audit flags, mine. The time zone-sensitive escalation matrix built on my logic. They thought they could replace a presence. They didn't realize they were cutting the cord to the system's brain. And I was the only one who knew where the backup lived. He didn't nod, didn't wave, just turned his chair ever so slightly, like shrinking away from responsibility had become instinct. They handed me a branded cardboard box that was clearly trying too hard matte taupe eco-friendly material with a soft embossed quote on the side that read, "Discomfort sparks greatness." Right. I dropped in my USB security token first. Then, my leather-bound notepad, filled with years of shorthand only I could decipher. And finally, my small cactus, the one I'd been nursing back to health after someone, probably Bree, drowned it with scented mineral water during her desk refresh phase. As I stepped into the hallway toward the elevators, the flat screens on the wall looped last quarter's highlight reel. I heard my voice before I saw the screen clear and measured, explaining risk clauses and federal overlay exemptions in a client-facing demo. The voice they fired was still carrying the brand. Miles didn't look back? Of course he didn't. He never needed to. That's what people like him were trained for, to sweep clean without touching the floor. Bree glanced over once. Her smile was brief, sheepish. It didn't reach her eyes. By the time the elevator door slid open, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was recalibrating. Quietly. Strategically. I wasn't going back, not ever. I was heading somewhere new. Somewhere sharp. They hadn't just let me go, they deleted the one person who understood how their operational spine was held together. I wasn't just the one who kept them compliant. I was the one who wrote the structure they used to land that $45 million logistics contract last year. I didn't just build the house they fired me and assumed the lights would stay on. 6 years erased in a sterile room, and a line about misaligned presence. I had been the quiet one at Halcyon Grid's onboarding sessions, always in the back row, head down, never once wearing the branded fleece or staying late for kombucha mixers. I didn't do team selfies. I wasn't there for belonging. I was there to build. By year 2, I had rebuilt their compliance ecosystem from the ground up, cutting audit exceptions by over 40% engineering an adaptive alert model that eventually became their showpiece platform. They renamed it without asking Halcyon and rolled it into every pitch like it was always there. My name wasn't mentioned in any demo, but deep in the system logs, my signature code still pulsed. Not malicious code, just mine. The blueprint, the backbone. I didn't care, at least that's what I told myself. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted precision. I wanted to watch inefficiency collapse under the weight of design that worked. When Halcyon Grid made their first serious pitch to the Department of Freight and Infrastructure, their draft was a Frankenstein of jargon and fluff. I tore it apart and rebuilt it clause by clause 3 nights straight. No sleep, just logic. They won the contract. The execs toasted with champagne. I got a Slack message. Great work, Cassidy. No caps, no period, no thanks. The red flags didn't come as explosions, they arrived as edits. My quarterly reports had suddenly become too dense for the senior leadership team. Not wrong, just too precise. Too technical. Too much legacy, formatting, Miles said. Then came the directive rewrite the internal compliance training manual in a friendlier tone. When I politely declined, suggesting technical accuracy shouldn't be sacrificed for flair, he assigned Bree Holloway to collaborate and soften the message. Bree had never once sat through a procurement audit or touched a regulation mapping cycle. But she smiled at the right moments, used phrases like energy synergy, and wore sunflower yellow blouses that matched her LinkedIn banner. She brought on-brand enthusiasm. The erosion wasn't loud. It was surgical. My desk got moved temporarily to the corner beside the janitorial closet under the guise of a space shuffle. They said the lighting was better over there. They stopped including me in client prep calls. My name was quietly removed from project dashboards. I still did the work, still fixed their budget gaps, and patched their risk matrix holes, but I wasn't invited to the table anymore. Even interns were suddenly presenting at team brainstorms, offering branding ideas for systems they didn't understand. I sat 3 feet away, invisible. It wasn't anger that took hold. It was documentation. Quiet, clear-eyed observation, a ledger of erosion. Then 1 week before the termination, I flew to Denver for a procurement roundtable. That's where I saw her. Mallory Chan, founder of a small but quietly rising consultancy called Northbeam Systems. Her talk was raw, clean, and cut through the fluff like nothing I'd heard in years. She outlined a modular framework for contract resilience that mirrored something I'd tried building 3 years ago, but was told was too operational, not experiential enough. Her slides weren't shiny. Her logic was steel. I introduced myself after the session. We spoke for 11 minutes, sharp, uninterrupted, and grounded. She didn't blink when I described my model refinements. She asked good questions. And most importantly, she listened. 3 days later, when Halcyon Grid officially terminated me for cultural misalignment, I didn't panic. I had already started drafting a new framework in my notebook. I never opened LinkedIn, never updated my status. Northbeam didn't just want me, they wanted the map inside my head. They didn't need optics. They wanted operations. When I walked into their office, 3 floors above a printer repair startup in Pioneer Square, the carpet still smelled like fresh glue. There was no corporate swag, no vision statement on the wall. Just a whiteboard, 3 desks, and a dev server blinking like a heartbeat. Mallory handed me a badge and said, "We want your brain, not your brand. If stories like this resonate with you, quiet strength, silent strategy, and the long game of justice, go ahead and subscribe." The next chapter is already being written. That was it. No culture guides, no onboarding playlist, no forced smiles, just purpose. I started by reverse engineering the Halsey site framework, not copying it, but reconstructing it from memory. Then I removed every bottleneck, every vanity report, every bloated metrics page that was designed for investors, not users. What emerged was a new engine, one that breathed in logic and exhaled clarity. We didn't name it. We didn't pitch it. We just built and waited. We didn't give it a name. We just used it. While other firms branded their frameworks with sleek acronyms and neon logos, we let the model speak for itself. I wrote the core logic myself, coded side by side with our in-house legal lead to patch every compliance gray zone. We pressure tested every clause with real procurement managers, modeled the structure against 10 years of federal audit data, and shaved margin drift down to a science. In 4 months, Northbeam Systems had the leanest, sharpest federal contracting engine on the West Coast. But we didn't post about it. No LinkedIn launch, no press release. We just waited. And then it came. A $50 million 0-cents RFP from the Department of Infrastructure, the exact type of contract Halcyon Grid once called untouchable, their crown jewel. The listing dropped quietly midday on a Friday. I opened the PDF, read through the standard clauses, and couldn't help but grin. I'd helped them write this language 2 years ago. They hadn't changed a single paragraph since. Why would they? They thought the system was locked. Permanent. They had no idea the architect now worked 3 floors above a shipping logistics startup and had redesigned the floor plan without the creaks. I understood their assumptions, their clause hierarchy, their lazy reliance on static language and risk buffers. I had once called it fragile but passable. Now it was outdated. So I built a counter model, one designed not to outperform, but to reveal. Quietly, surgically. Our proposal didn't sparkle. It didn't overpromise or repackage trends. It moved like a scalpel sliding between the lines of what they thought was flawless. When Mallory reviewed the final draft, she turned to me and asked, "Do they know it's you?" I shook my head. Not yet. We submitted without noise. No campaign, no industry whispers. Just clean formatting, airtight logic, and a digital signature they wouldn't recognize. Halcyon Grid hadn't noticed my absence. Not really. I was listed in public directories as open to consulting. My LinkedIn hadn't been touched. No drama, no hints. I wasn't trying to be seen. That was their world visibility over value. At Northbeam, I was under the hood, not on the screen. And that's how I liked it. The deadline passed. The bid window closed. We didn't talk much. Just worked. Quietly optimized our supporting documentation while others posed in front of trade show banners. And when the review board released their shortlist, quietly as always, most firms took days to respond. We had dissected it before sunrise. Halcyon Grid was on the list, but barely. Their proposal looked good from a distance, full of polished buzzwords and bright charts. But underneath, bloating, generalizations, promises their timelines couldn't support. Recycled phrasing I'd seen in 3 previous bids. They hadn't adapted. They hadn't needed to until now. Our proposal, on the other hand, was built on current data, predictive clause mapping, and lean logic. Our legal team didn't even need revisions. Every sentence had a job. Every dollar had a reason. And this time, I wasn't waiting to be invited to the table. I had designed the table. Our budget transparent to the decimal. Every dollar accounted for. Escalation clauses, modeled on real-world CPI fluctuation data and tied directly to performance checkpoints. We didn't add buffer fluff. We engineered confidence. Every line in that proposal made sense because I'd spent 4 months making sure it did. I knew exactly where Halcyon Grid would cut corners because I had once built around those very cracks. And now they were exposed. The day of the public pitch felt less like a showcase and more like a courtroom. Mallory stood beside me, calm, focused, as I queued up the demo. No animations, no jargon-filled intros, just clean architecture, test-backed models, and a system that made auditors lean forward in their seats. When our audit risk module displayed its escalation tiering, I saw the first eyebrow rise from the federal panel. That was the crack. By the time we finished, the The room was still. Not from boredom, but from processing. We said, "Thank you." Sat down and watched as Halcyon Grid tried to follow. Their VP of operations stumbled over a basic variation clause. Their director of culture, yes culture, launched into an incoherent pitch about adaptive alignment and narrative consistency in regulation optics. I knew that tone. I'd heard it every Tuesday at Halcyon Grid. It didn't land. Not this time. Not in a room full of decision-makers who wanted results, not theater. A week later, the board's decision posted publicly. Quiet like always. Just one line. Northbeam Systems awarded. 50 million 0 cents. Full implementation authority. Support clause. Optional extensions. Halcyon Grid's name, not even listed. Mallory didn't gloat. She looked up from the announcement and simply said, "They never saw you coming, but the fallout was just beginning." The first message came from Bree Holloway, a bubbly ping on LinkedIn. "Hope you're doing well? Just curious. Were you involved in the Northbeam proposal?" I didn't reply. The next message came from Miles himself, polished, measured, a full paragraph of corporate smoothness. "Would love to reconnect, clear the air, maybe even explore synergies between Northbeam and Halcyon Grid." I deleted it, and then came the offer, a full-time return, executive tier, fancy title, salary increase, even relocation support if needed. The PDF attachment was neatly branded with soft lavender headers and a closing line that read, "We value what you bring to the table." I read it once, then laughed softly, the kind of laugh that lives between disbelief and final clarity. They were offering respect like it was a severance package. But I wasn't angry. Not smug either. I was done. I closed the email, turned off notifications, and quietly set my LinkedIn profile to private. Mallory didn't need an explanation. She just nodded when I told her. No speeches, no victory dance, just silence, the kind that lingers longer than applause. And within a week, the consultancy circles were humming. Halcyon Grid had lost its shine. Clients began reviewing contracts, looking closer, asking questions. Their reputation hadn't shattered. It was unraveling thread by thread, and I hadn't lifted a single finger. Some clients found discrepancies. Others started asking deeper questions. It didn't collapse. All at once, it frayed. Quietly, deliberately. From the outside, Halcyon Grid looked like it was hitting a seasonal dip. Internally, it was decay. And I hadn't lifted a single finger to sabotage them. I just built something better, out in the open, right under their noses. In team meetings at Northbeam, I used anonymized compliance models to train our new hires. Every flaw I had once patched at Halcyon Grid. Now it was a case study. They didn't know the origin. They didn't need to. The lesson stood on its own. Never mistake polish for power. Never confuse branding with value. They had spent years trying to mold me into something presentable, something ornamental. Instead, I became surgical. I didn't destroy Halcyon Grid. I just made them irrelevant. And when they finally realized who had quietly orchestrated the contract loss, I wasn't on a stage. I wasn't posting think pieces or victory threads. I was already 5 steps ahead, blueprinting the next contract model in a shared workspace off Yesler Way. The woman who once handed me a termination letter with a rehearsed smile and a HR-approved phrase now sat across from me, clutching a proposal portfolio I had rendered obsolete. And this time, she looked like the one waiting for judgment. The industry showcase that month was public by design. It wasn't just about securing new business, it was about signaling who held the momentum now. Northbeam's booth wasn't flashy, but it hummed with presence. Real-time demos, interactive dashboards, federal liaisons asking real questions. No fluff, just proof. I hadn't planned to attend the evening mixer, but then I saw the attendee list. Miles Everett, still listed as VP of Brand Integration at Halcyon Grid. No new title, no promotion, just clinging to relevance through association. I arrived late. Mallory saw my name badge and gave me a look, half amusement, half approval. She never asked questions she didn't need answered. That's why I trusted her. The mixer was buzz and bravado, pitches dressed as pleasantries, product demos spun into small talk. And then I saw him. Miles standing alone by the high-top table, scanning for anyone to recognize him. When his eyes landed on me, I watched his expression flicker. First confusion, then realization, and finally, calculation. He straightened his posture, smoothed the sleeve of his designer blazer, and approached like we were old allies. "Cassidy," he said, voice smooth, but uncertain. "You've made quite the impact lately." I smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just enough to let the silence carry. "Northbeam's approach is disruptive," he added, trying to sound gracious. "Maybe there's room for synergy down the line." I didn't answer, just took a slow sip of club soda and let him squirm. That moment, standing in a room that once wouldn't even acknowledge me, wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. I didn't need to win the room. I had already redesigned it. I hear Northbeam's reshaping how agencies evaluate compliance architecture across the board, Miles said, swirling the ice in his glass. I nodded. "We focus on function, not theater." His smile thinned. "Always your strength," he said, almost nostalgic. "I've been meaning to reach out. There's been talk of collaboration," he added too casually. "Some alignment opportunities. Maybe even framework integration." "No," I said quietly. "Not with heat. Not with pride. Just truth. I don't collaborate with people who rebranded exclusion as cohesion." That cracked him just a bit. His grip shifted. His fingers curled slightly around his tumbler, like he was trying to steady something that had already tipped. "You misunderstood," he started, the old corporate rhythm kicking in. "You underestimated," I corrected. "And now, you're out of sync with the very system you once controlled." He opened his mouth again, but I had already turned. Mallory intercepted me with a look half question, half reassurance. "You good?" I nodded. That was all I needed. Not revenge, not redemption, just that moment. Watching him register that the framework he dismissed, the one he walked away from, was now setting the new industry bar. Later, I saw Bree across the room at a junior firm's booth. She was pitching recycled ideas in a louder voice, smiling harder than she used to. I didn't acknowledge her. Some echoes don't need replies. Word traveled fast that Halcyon Grid had been quietly cut from a second pre-qual bid. No explanation, just silence. The kind that signals you're no longer being evaluated. You're being forgotten. They couldn't read the room anymore, because the people who once wrote the language were gone. That night, I walked the quiet streets back to my apartment in Columbia City. No press releases, no victory lap, just peace. I thought about the younger version of myself, the woman who once sat in a quiet HR office being told she didn't fit the culture. I remembered the scripted sympathy, the branded box, the silence in the elevator, and I realized something: I wasn't trying to belong anymore. I was busy designing what comes next. The people who had once built the walls now found themselves standing outside the doors I had quietly closed. Miles used to lead Monday meetings like they were sermons, voice sharp, gaze cutting. Now his name only floated in whispers. No more commands, just caution. Halcyon Grid didn't implode overnight. No company that Glossy ever does. But it started unraveling from within. Softly, unexpectedly. Bree left first, no notice, just a job change announcement. 2 senior liaisons followed, citing cultural drift, the exact language once used to push me out. Miles's team meetings turned brittle. His tone, once polished, sounded forced, like someone trying to grip a room that no longer listened. But the real fracture came when Northbeam secured the $50 million federal contract that Miles had staked his entire annual roadmap on. Our bid wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was precise and undeniable. And this time, there was no mistaking who built it. Our proposal wasn't just functional, it was hyper-targeted, surgically precise, built from the inside out, using the very framework I had once created under Halcyon Grid's banner. But it wasn't just the contract we took. It was the credibility. The press didn't pick up the story because of who we were. They ran it because of who Halcyon Grid no longer was. One industry analyst quoted an unnamed source. They lost the mind that built their backbone. I never confirmed it, never denied it. The same government liaison who once ignored my emails now looped me into strategy meetings first, cautiously, then consistently. I didn't demand the room. I had already designed the structure it stood on. A few weeks later, Halcyon Grid released an internal memo. It lacked the usual polish. Gone were the buzzwords and bright metaphors. Instead, phrases like re-evaluating operational cohesion and navigating internal fatigue danced clumsily around one fact: they had lost their compass. And the person they fired for not being vibrant enough had built an entirely new direction, one grounded in clarity, not color. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no podium, just moments. Moments like sitting in a federal innovation roundtable and seeing my name quietly listed as a featured architect. Or opening an email from a former junior analyst at Halcyon Grid that simply said, "You made space for the rest of us to stop pretending." That meant more than any headline. Eventually, Miles left Halcyon Grid to pursue advisory work. Some say he consults startups on culture building. Others whisper that he ghostwrites vision alignment audits for firms trying to mimic a style he couldn't sustain. I haven't spoken to him since that industry mixer. I don't need to, because the truth is, the revenge wasn't in his collapse. It was in the silence that followed. The kind of silence that happens when someone finally realizes they mistook their influence for permanence. As for me, I stay off the masthead. No photo ops, no award circuits. I like it that way. But every system we roll out at Northbeam bears the imprint of someone they once called too restrained. That's the beauty of redirection. You don't need to knock walls down. You just quietly reroute the current until the people who once dismissed you realize they're standing in a building they no longer understand. Sometimes strategic revenge doesn't explode. It unfolds like a blueprint. Quiet, deliberate, precise. Until the people who tried to erase you find themselves locked outside the very system they used to control. Cassidy's story isn't just about a job lost. It's about identity, resilience, and reclaiming control in a world that often prizes appearance over value. When I was let go under the phrase misaligned presence, what they really meant was, you made us uncomfortable because you didn't conform. And that's a truth many professionals, especially women, introverts and builders, know far too well. This isn't about burning bridges. It's about designing better ones somewhere else. Cassidy didn't file lawsuits. She didn't send emails trying to defend her reputation. She didn't even bother setting the record straight. Instead, she put her energy into building something better with people who valued substance over show process, over polish, and outcomes over optics. That's the real lesson here. Power doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being indispensable. Halcyon Grid fired the very architect of their operational future because she refused to wear their aesthetic. And in doing so, they unknowingly handed her the blueprint to their blind spots. But there's something deeper here, something about identity and dignity. We hear it all the time, companies claiming to want authenticity, diverse perspectives, fresh energy. But the moment that authenticity doesn't smile enough, doesn't pop on camera, or doesn't match the latest branding deck, it's labeled a risk, a liability, a problem to phase out. Cassidy's firing wasn't personal, it was systemic. And her success wasn't revenge, it was justice. But not the kind that throws chairs or makes headlines. The kind of justice that comes through redirection, through rebuilding, through precision. And still, this is important. Not every story ends with a satisfying moment of reckoning. Not everyone gets to watch the system that discarded them unravel in slow motion. But that's not the only version of victory. Sometimes forgiveness is liberation. Other times, silence is the sharpest instrument of all. The key is to act with intention, not impulse. So if you're someone standing in the shadow of a corporate structure that never saw your value, here's where you begin. 1. Audit your value. Write down what you actually bring: your skills, your instincts, your ethics. Don't let someone else's agenda decide your worth. 2. Observe quietly. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document patterns, track shifts. Your clarity is your strength. 3. Find aligned spaces. Whether it's a lean startup, a creative side hustle, or a new circle of professionals, invest in places where your values are reflected and respected. 4. Switch your profile to private. Your next move doesn't need to be a declaration. It just needs to be ready. You don't owe anyone visibility. You owe yourself momentum. And if you've seen yourself in this story, if you've ever been told you weren't a fit, if you've ever been dismissed for being too quiet, too real too, maybe someone else out there needs your story too. So share it. And if you believe in quiet power, subscribe. More stories like Cassidy's are coming. Stories that prove real value doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs space to do what it was built to do.